Good afternoon, Robert Scribbler. It is November 29th, 2018. Thank you for joining me for another climate change and clean energy video blog. Now, for this segment, I'm going to talk about a subject that has erupted in the news recently, that has ripped through the news recently, that is just continuously in the news, at least over the past 3 or more days, and that is the fact that GM has recently announced that it is going to close a number of plants and lay off a number of workers, namely about 14,000 workers in the US and Canada, as it attempts to reposition itself to face the auto industry future. And the related response, which has been very unhelpful, by President Trump attacking GM and spreading all of this misinformation about the present state of the US auto industry, following his promise that he would protect auto workers in states like Ohio that right now are seeing these massive layoffs. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this is this topic is one that is intertwined with the necessary responses to human-caused climate change, in that auto industry can and hopefully will play a major part in the necessary clean energy transition, which is the primary first response to human-caused climate change to try and blunt impacts that are now happening and are ramping up. So the reason why I'm going to address this issue is because both the economic issues and the issues of future prosperity for the US and for manufacturing regions such as Ohio and in Detroit and the central US are intertwined with our responses to human-caused climate change. And there is a vision in which our manufacturing industries can not only prosper in a response to human-caused climate change, but can lead the way. And I'm going to go into that a little bit later. But before I do, I'd like to focus in on GM and what GM's present situation is. Now GM is it's a large company. It's an older company, and because of that, it has a bit of difficulty responding to new trends and leading the way. When you have sunk investments and sunk infrastructure, there can be an institutional inertia that makes it very difficult for large, older companies to act nimbly to not only ensure future progress and future growth, but also to ensure prosperity for their workers. And the reason for that is, in times of change, these industries have a tendency to dig in and to keep trying to use the old methods that made profits in the past, even though those markets are dwindling. And that's one of the reasons why GM faced bankruptcy during the 2008 recession. It was kind of the recession that knocked GM off the cliff, as it were. But there were longer term trends that made GM vulnerable over time. So let's look at GM's present, some of the aspects, some of the factual data that give us an idea of what GM's present position is in the market and where the market is going, and what GM needs to do, even though it may be difficult, to prosper in the future. So just looking at some general statistics, passenger vehicle sales, and these are like regular car sales, have the long-term trend is that the size of the market in the US for passenger cars is shrinking, and that's a longer-term trend as people become more interested in small SUVs, pickups, light trucks. But looking at the SUV market, what's really interesting is the kinds of SUVs that people are more and more interested in tend to be these crossovers or these smaller SUVs, not the large SUVs that GM has tended to build. And so even though the overall light trucks or SUV or pickup truck market is growing by about 8% a year, year on year in 2018, GM right now is positioned to build the really big SUVs and pickup trucks that people are less interested today than the smaller, more nimble crossovers, maybe more fuel efficient, maybe more economical, but that have larger interior volume for things like families or for entrepreneurs, things like that. These crossovers and smaller SUVs are very attractive for a number of reasons, and so GM is looks like it's positioning itself now to try and transition less from like a car maker, and also less from a big like suburban, big SUV manufacturer to like a smaller SUV manufacturer, and that transition from the standpoint of capital is going to cost some money, which is one of the reasons why they're producing this transition. Now this trend was somewhat predictable, and GM is a little bit behind the curve in making this response, which is one of the reasons why it hurts now. But making this response now hurts a lot less than making the response later. So from a business standpoint, GM is making arguably the right decision with regards to looking at these trends. Now, from the clean energy perspective, I would also like to point out that one of the largest areas in which growth is occurring in the U.S. auto industry right now is in electric vehicles. And the rate of growth year on year for 2018 looks like it's going to be in the range of 70, possibly 75, possibly as high as 80% growth year on year. And that is just an insanely rapid pace of growth. GM is not and has not been very well positioned to take advantage of this growing new clean energy vehicle market. And as you can see, even though GM vehicles and high quality GM vehicles like the Chevy Volt and the Chevy Bolt EV, clean energy vehicles, even though they sell well, they're presently representing maybe about a little less than 10% of the US market, while Tesla vehicles, which is an all clean energy company, it represents more than 50% of the US electric vehicle market. So when there's rapid growth in the US electric vehicle market, the beneficiary primarily has been large electric vehicle manufacturers like Tesla. And GM so far has again been a bit behind the curve despite producing high quality electric vehicles like the Chevy Bolt and the Chevy Volt. Admittedly, not quite as groundbreaking as the Tesla vehicles, but these electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles that GM has been producing are serious pieces of new technology. And in my opinion, they probably, like the Chevy Volt, could have sold so much more if they had built the infrastructure to sell it and had marketed it more, especially when it first came out. It was a completely groundbreaking vehicle. The Chevy Bolt was another bit of a leap forward, a long range, a relatively inexpensive electric vehicle, and the prospects for the Bolt weren't quite as good because Tesla had gotten into such a position of market dominance. So GM is doing the right thing in also focusing more on electric vehicles as the electric vehicle market in the U.S. is expanding very rapidly. But again, it's a bit behind the curve because of some of those legacy issues that we talked about before. So looking forward, what can GM and other U.S. automakers and the U.S. as a whole, U.S. manufacturing as a whole do to prosper? And we're going to look at I'm going to look at Tesla and the Tesla business model and provide you guys with some information with regards to that. So automakers in the past have traditionally only focused on manufacturing automobiles on a mass scale. The thing with a clean energy based manufacturing system linked to auto manufacturing is that not only can auto manufacturers produce clean energy vehicles and sell them, but they can also sell clean energy systems. So what this does is the mass manufacturing of cars and batteries by themselves open up new markets. So even if the US auto market is relatively flat when it comes to year-on-year growth, which is the case, the year-on-year growth is very small when it comes to total autos produced. If you're a clean energy manufacturing company, you can produce automobiles for a rapidly growing market segment, that being electric vehicles, and a highly desirable one for a number of reasons, including, very importantly, responses to human-caused climate change. But you can also enter a new market area, clean energy, and by producing the same materials pretty much that you would produce for an electric vehicle itself, the batteries. And this ability of leveraging manufacturing to open up new markets provides a massive opportunity for automakers who already own large manufacturing facilities. And so the cost of actually changing their manufacturing facilities to retool them, even though the cost of retooling is a significant capital investment, is less than it would be. You don't have to build the whole new manufacturing chain from scratch. You just have to reposition it to produce new energy and clean energy systems. So the issue is with a clean energy company like Tesla, and I talk a lot about the Tesla model. I call it the Tesla all clean energy business model. It is that it positions a company to enter new growth areas in automobiles, but also to compete on the global energy stage and leverage manufacturing to do that. So if the United States and GM are intelligent, and because this is the way of the future, China is already trying to do this on a mass scale. And so if the US auto manufacturers want to compete and lead in the new global economies that are emerging, they will move rapidly into clean energy systems. And because these manufacturing systems can be leveraged to produce energy producing systems, the potential for growth and not stagnation when it comes to leveling off in vehicle sales, at least in the US, is there. In addition, new markets such as China are already showing much higher demand for electric vehicles, as well as markets in Europe and emerging markets in India. So not only would a rapid transition in the US auto manufacturing system provide an avenue for growth, if that manufacturing system can open up or can gain entry into some of these new markets, then the rate of growth could be quite rapid. And so the news coming out of places like the General Motors and Detroit would change from worker layoffs to growth in new industries and the promotion of a new industry, the likes of which we haven't seen since the internet boom in the 90s and in the early 2000s. So that's a bit of a difference between looking backward and unfortunately our present president is currently looking backward, way backward, as he seeks to cut incentives for electric vehicles. The US, if you're looking at overall policy, how can you incentivize manufacturers to take advantage of this massive new industry, this very beneficial new industry that is arising, then you're looking at not only keeping the incentives that we have, but adding new incentives and leveraging the national laboratories to spur this growth in US manufacturing that is already taking place in some sectors led by clean energy innovators like Tesla. And GM does have an opportunity to participate in that market. In my opinion, as Americans and as responsible Americans who support good policy, we should support politicians who support the clean energy transition, which will be much better off for our workers, which will be much better off for our health and our livelihoods, which will be much better off for us as we confront worsening climate change, and which will be much, much better off for us as we confront emerging markets in China and changing markets in Europe. So just to put the whole GM kerfuffle into context, in all honesty, the reason why it's happening is because the world is changing, and we can either try and take advantage and be a part of the new trends that are emerging as a country and as people who want GM to thrive, or we can try and fight the future and make the future a lot worse for ourselves and our children. Thank you for joining me, and I'll be chatting with you soon.